As the search intensifies for a replacement and Democrats demand a special prosecutor for the Russia investigation. This is Special Report. Welcome to a special Sunday primetime edition of Special Report. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. On this Mother's Day, President Trump's most loyal supporters and staff members are saying the country is seeing the mother of all overreactions to last week's firing of FBI Director James Comey and then the explanations about it. However, it was and is a huge story with big implications not only for politics in Washington, but also the leadership of the FBI and the continuing leadership of a counterintelligence investigation about Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. The firing and the fallout, the main topic of the Sunday shows today, despite a global cyber attack and another ominous missile test from North Korea. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Catherine Harrods looks at who's in the running tonight to replace Comey at the FBI. But we start off, as we often do in the busy news environment we're in, on the North Lawn with Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. Like so many other public officials, the FBI director serves at the pleasure of the president and can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. But President Trump is again finding that prerogative challenged on many fronts tonight. A relatively quiet day for President Trump ahead of what will be a very busy week, including his first foreign trip and indications he may name a new FBI director before he leaves on Friday.
I think the process is going to go quickly because almost all of them are very well known. You know, they've been vetted over their lifetime, essentially, but very well known, highly respected, really talented people. And that's what we want for the FBI.
The Attorney General is already well into the search for Comey's replacement, interviewing 8 candidates yesterday. But the fallout over Comey's firing continues. Democrats casting an increasingly suspicious eye on why President Trump ousted the FBI director.
Do you believe the president fired Comey to interfere with the FBI investigation into Russian interference in the election and a possible link to the Trump campaign?
The president's actions and his statement lends to that appearance.
Even some Republicans are scratching their heads over how it all unfolded and what happens next. Nebraska Republican Senator Ben Sasse calls the circumstances of the firing, quote, troubling.
I'm not sure how this president makes lots of decisions, so I honestly don't know. But I do know that we are in the midst of a civilization warping crisis of public trust, and we need to talk honestly about our institutions that need to be restored and need to have the ability for people in 5 and 8 and 10 years to trust these institutions.
Sasse is not alone in his assessment that U.S. institutions are under siege.
I think in many ways our institutions are under assault, both externally, and that's the big news here, is the Russian interference in our election system. And I think as well our institutions are under assault internally.
Internally from the president?
Exactly.
The Secretary of State appeared to see it differently, that President Trump simply has a management style that dictates no one can take their job for granted.
I am devoted to helping the president achieve his objectives, helping him be successful, and I understand I have to earn his confidence every day with how I go about those affairs.
The president's most ardent supporters aren't fazed in the least by Comey's firing, the reasons for it, or the shifting explanations in the days that followed. When the president appeared on the Jumbotron ahead of his Liberty University commencement address, the stadium literally erupted. But if one of the reasons for Comey's firing was the president's frustration at the lingering presence of the Russia investigation, axing Comey appears to have only given his opponents more reason to keep Russia in the headlines.
There is a need to get to the bottom of this. There's a crisis of credibility with the president. I mean, so many things, you know, there's so much factual fabrication and then backsliding and contradiction.
There are reports today that the president is frustrated and upset with many members of his staff, even some cabinet officials, and is considering a massive shakeup. Senior administration told Fox News today such talk is, quote, nonsense, but it does look like there could be some changes in the messaging apparatus very soon.
Brett?
John Roberts live in the North Lawn. John, thank you. We now know of more than a dozen people who are believed to still be in the mix to replace James Comey as the head of the FBI. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge takes a look at the list tonight.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions and his deputy Rod Rosenstein have interviewed 8 candidates to be the next FBI director, less than a week after President Trump fired James Comey. The candidates include Adam Lee, the special agent in charge of the FBI's Richmond, Virginia office, Andrew McCabe, the acting FBI director, and Michael J. Garcia, a former prosecutor and associate judge on New York's highest court. The ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee objects to the Attorney General's role in finding a new FBI director because Sessions recused himself from the Russia case.
I don't believe he should be part of this review process if he's going to have a true recusal. And as well, I think whoever the future FBI director ought to be, it should be a law enforcement professional.
Warner's call to skip a politician is echoed by Republicans.
We got a chance to reset here as a nation. The president has a chance to clean up the mess that he mostly created. So I would encourage the president to pick somebody we can all rally around, including those who work in the FBI.
Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn, a former Texas Attorney General, was also interviewed, along with Mike Rogers, a former FBI agent and former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Rogers has the endorsement of the 13,000-strong FBI Agents Association. While able candidates, Graham advised against them.
I think it's now time to pick somebody that comes from within the ranks or has such a reputation that has no political background at all.
Also on the short list, Bush appointee and Virginia Judge Henry E. Hudson, who struck down the Obamacare individual mandate, saying Congress exceeded its authority. And 2 women, Fran Townsend, a former Homeland Security advisor for President George W. Bush, as well as Alice Fisher, who also served in the Bush administration as a high-ranking Justice Department official.
You need to have someone with a very strong background in law enforcement, and you need someone of iron independence.
Dupree, a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, said Comey is not the first FBI director to face political pressure. After 9/11, Director Mueller clashed with the Bush White House on surveillance. And then FBI Director Louis Freeh had a strained relationship with a scandal-ridden Clinton White House.
You need to have someone who, when he or she takes an action or makes a decision, that people aren't immediately going to attribute some political motive to that.
Republican Senator Mike Lee told Fox News Sunday he completely disagrees with the idea that the Attorney General should detach himself from the search because Sessions will work closely with the new FBI director on a variety of cases beyond Russia. Lee's opinion has weighed along with Senator Graham because both men sit on the Judiciary Committee that will oversee the confirmation hearings. Brett?
Catherine, thank you. Let's get some analysis now from Ron Hosko. He's a former assistant director of the FBI. He now works with the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for being here.
Sure, good evening.
I want to play 2 sound bites from you from today and from the last testimony. First, this is the Senate Minority Leader being asked a question about whether they are going to move forward with an FBI replacement.
Senator Mark Warner,
yes.
He's the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. He wants the Democratic Party to refuse to vote on the nomination of a new FBI director until a special prosecutor is appointed. Do you support that move?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of Democrats who feel that way. We'll have to discuss it as a caucus, but I would support that move because who the FBI director is related to who the special prosecutor is.
And then this is acting FBI Director McCabe answering questions on Capitol Hill last week.
You have the resources you need for the Russia investigation. Is that correct?
Sir, we believe it's adequately resourced.
So there's not the actions about Jim Comey and his release has not curtailed the investigation from the FBI. It's still moving forward.
The investigation will move forward, absolutely.
No agents have been removed that are the ongoing career folks that are doing the investigation?
No, sir.
Is it your impression at this point that the FBI is unable to complete the investigation in a fair and expeditious way because of the removal of Jim Comey?
It is my opinion and belief that the FBI will continue to pursue this investigation vigorously and completely.
So your thoughts listening to those 2 sound bites and juxtaposition there?
Well, first, as to Senator Schumer's comments, I did find myself agreeing with some of what he said in the last week. However, just assuming that the execution of Jim Comey's termination was completely botched from a communications perspective, it was, I thought, insulting to not just Jim Comey, but to the organization.
Take the rollout aside.
Right.
So now you have a president who's fired his FBI director.
That's right. I do think that Capitol Hill is Capitol Hill, and there's plenty of hypocrisy, and I think there's plenty of Democrats who are using the termination as a sledgehammer to beat the administration. And my hope is that somehow the Democrats can be satisfied with a nominee, with a candidate for this position, that they would get broad consensus into backing. You know, is that a John Cornyn? Is it a Mike Rogers who had an R behind their names? I have a doubt about that. My hope is not just a very broad and strong consensus, not 51 votes on the Hill, but 95 votes. Because I think the country needs to embrace this next FBI director as well.
You know, there's a number of names out there, and Catherine went over some of them. One of them that was not in that piece was Merrick Garland, who was up for Supreme Court nominee. Orrin Hatch, believe it or not, on the Republican senator from Utah on Judiciary, mentioned his name first to the White House, we're told, and then Mike Lee did, and now the Senate Majority Leader has. Is that a possibility?
I think anything is a possibility right now. I'm not sure what the strategy is. I'm not sure what the plan is. Some of these choices seem a little bit unconventional in my estimation. However, if you look at this list of known candidates, there is significant capability, intellect, independence in a number of these folks. And at the same time, with a number of them, I think, you know, conservative principles. That the candidate could be within that, but it sounds as though that the Attorney General and the DAG are conducting these interviews.
And very quickly, are you surprised that this far into this investigation, for all that we've seen that has leaked out about everything, that we haven't had one leak about definite evidence connecting Russia to the Trump campaign in anything really?
As we have leaks of probably some accurate information, subpoenas going out, that can be validated and verified, and then you have, I think, leaks of information that are bogus. But if there was ever a time to leak information that damned the Trump administration that did connect those dots, it would have been this week, and we haven't heard it. That being said, these investigations can be very complex, very long-lasting, particularly when you're talking about overseas connections and transactions, and will slow the progress, and we may not know. We may not know for several more months.
But still surprising that we haven't heard anything, if there was something.
Particularly this week.
All right, Ron, thank you.
My pleasure.
What do you think? Who should be the next FBI director? Let me know on Twitter, @Bret Baier. Use the hashtag Special Report. We have a list on our Facebook page and our website, Special Report, Facebook at facebook.com/Bret Baier SR. This is a Fox News alert. North Korea says the medium long-range strategic missile it tested over this weekend can carry a nuclear warhead. That is just coming in now. The test comes as the communist regime signals some willingness to sit down and talk with the presidents of both the U.S. and South Korea. But this new information is a new wrinkle. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen has the latest tonight.
Pentagon sources tell Fox News the missile North Korea launched early Sunday local time, which was airborne for 30 minutes and splashed down just south of the Russian city of Vladivostok, was a single-stage liquid-fueled KN-17, useful in targeting ships at sea, and the first success for that model after 3 failed launches in recent weeks.
He's in a state of paranoia.
UN Ambassador Nikki Haley said North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un was likely challenging new South Korean President Moon Jae-in. The test came as one of Kim's top diplomats suggested openness to direct talks with the U.S. while scoffing at the idea of denuclearization.
If conditions are right, we will speak with the Trump administration.
Are you able to give up nuclear weapons?
Haley made clear the U.S. is not amused by the regime's provocations.
Having a missile test is not the way to sit down with the president, because he's absolutely not going to do it. I mean, there's a lot of sanctions left that we can start to do, whether it's with oil, whether it's with energy, whether it's with their maritime ships, exports. We can do a lot of different things that we haven't done yet.
In Seoul, President Moon convened an emergency national security session, while Japan's prime minister vowed a resolute response to the North Koreans from Tokyo.
We will keep our high levels of alert while cooperating with the U.S. and South Korea.
With China responsible for 90% of North Korea's trade, the Trump administration is counting on Beijing to rein in its client state, and U.S. officials claim they are receiving greater cooperation from the Chinese than ever before. But at least one analyst cautioned the president and his aides against imagining the Chinese to be true allies in the effort to bring Kim Jong-un to heel.
We got to start imposing costs on Chinese enterprises and banks that have been supporting North Korea's weaponization programs.
It was from state-run media in North Korea that we got the word from the regime that the missile tested this weekend can carry a nuclear warhead, but most analysts believe the regime has not yet perfected the process of miniaturizing such warheads and harnessing them to intercontinental ballistic missiles. Brett.
Good point, James. Thank you. Let's talk more about all of this tonight with syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, your thoughts? North Korea saying they can put a nuclear bomb on that missile. We're not buying it, obviously, yet, but obviously it ratchets up the tension over this.
Every time they do a test, even the unsuccessful ones, they learn something.
And this was successful by all accounts.
Right. Whether or not it can really carry a warhead, whether they can miniaturize their nukes to fit on a warhead, we don't know. But we know that they are racing to do that. It seems to me the really big event, well, this event, I think its first meaning is this is a challenge to the new president of South Korea, just elected last week, the most pro-North Korean of the lot. The more pro-American one was impeached, is now under indictment. So what you have is the opposition who are more inclined to go soft. What that means for us, we're not sure. But this prime minister opposed the placement of the THAAD anti-missile system that we have just put in place to protect South Korea from the north. So they're trying to sort of heat up the tensions that you might see between South Korea and us. The really important event is going to happen within the next few weeks. We are going to test an anti-missile missile to shoot down an intercontinental missile that they might be aiming at the U.S. That will be a statement that we are not going to allow this to happen. More importantly, that we have the capacity to prevent this.
As you look at a map and you can see the proximity of all these countries here, you're talking about South Korea, but obviously right there also Japan. This is where the North Korean missile launch happened. These latest tests obviously having an impact throughout that region. Listen to former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, former CIA director as well, on the status of what we're seeing here.
We've had 3 administrations follow a pretty consistent policy toward North Korea, and it really hasn't gotten us anywhere. So the notion of disrupting and sort of putting the Chinese on notice that it's no longer business as usual for the United States, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, Charles, he's saying what he's seeing so far is a good thing as far as the pressure.
Well, the pressure has been begun, but you need follow-up. The first pressure, I thought, was the Syrian strike, showing that when the U.S. puts down red lines, we mean it. We have a new sheriff in town who seems to want to impose his will. But all we're hearing right now is we call upon the world community to do something. That's the same as Obama, same as Bush, same as Clinton.
Let me interrupt you. Let me play President Trump talking to Judge Jeanine on this very issue.
This should have been stopped a long time ago. This should have been stopped by Obama. This should have been stopped from before Obama. I remember when Clinton wrote in his book all about the wonderful deal he made with North Korea. They started making missiles the next day and nuclear the next day. What can you do about this? I can't talk to you about that, but I think we're having some very, very good thoughts.
Good thoughts, different.
Well, we don't know what the good thoughts are, and they may be great thoughts, but we need some action. So far, we've seen what looks like a campaign of pressure, but it seems as if the president is putting almost all his eggs in the basket of the Chinese, who have never shown good faith in squeezing North Korea. I go back to what I've recommended now for years. You want to get the attention of the Chinese? Declare that the U.S. is quite prepared to look favorably upon a Japanese and South Korean nuclear deterrent. That will get the attention of the Chinese. Their worst nightmare is a nuclear Japan. Japan does not want to go nuclear, but there would be nothing like that to make the Chinese actually do something.
Let alone Taiwan. I mean, one phone call got them all worked up.
Exactly. No, this would be an earthquake, but we've been waiting now 20 years, and we don't have a lot of time. What people don't understand, the North Koreans are racing to develop an ICBM that can hit us, and we don't have a lot of time. The fuse is burning.
Charles, thank you. When we come back, do you believe the federal government is out of control? Cybersecurity experts are warning that a second, more powerful ransomware attack may happen tomorrow as people return to work and power up their computers. Authorities all over the world are looking for the hackers behind Friday's attack that affected an estimated 200,000 victims globally. Those victims included British hospitals and Germany's national railway. Many Americans who are frustrated with what they see out of Washington are looking into a little-known option for taking back power and control. Tonight, correspondent Doug McKelway tells us about how the Constitution itself could be changed.
A taunting chant on the House floor after passage of the health care bill was a new marker of the open hostility in dysfunctional Washington. Dueling used to be one way to settle political insults, but Article 5 of the Constitution offers a more civilized way, a convention of the states, something not done since before the signing of the Constitution.
It is the only process that is available to address what Washington is doing. Washington is not going to fix itself.
In his book, The Liberty Amendments, author and radio host Mark Levin describes the remedy of a convention of the states. With 9 million listeners a day and known to draw huge crowds to his book signings, he has increased its popularity, helping to spawn the Convention of States Project. It claims 2.8 million volunteers, expected to grow to 10 million by year's end, with directors in every congressional district. While 11 state legislatures, most recently Texas, have already supported a convention of the states, that number is far short of the 34 states the Constitution requires before a convention can be called.
People who believe in liberty get behind this. I think we'll get our 34 states. And I'll tell you one other thing. If we get 15, 18, 20, 22 states, I think Washington is going to begin to shake. And Washington's going to understand that there is a process in the Constitution that actually bypasses Washington.
With Republicans in full control of 32 state houses, supporters believe a convention is within reach. They say its agenda would likely include requiring a balanced budget, reducing the federal regulatory burden on the states, restoring state sovereignty by eliminating federal mandates and grants, and allowing a two-thirds majority of the states to override Supreme Court decisions, federal laws, and regulations.
I said from the Senate floor in 2006, there's a rumble in our country. You just saw the part of the rumble with this last election. The founders added this to the Constitution because they recognize that never in history has a central government voluntarily ceded power back to its people. So this is the safety check.
Opponents fear a convention dominated by special interests, that it might result in the evisceration of hard-won legislative and court victories.
Any constitutional right could be up from grabs, from the freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, the right to privacy, to overturning Supreme Court cases around marriage equality and health care and abortion.
But the founders provided yet another safeguard against such overreach. They required 3/4 of the states, or 38 of them, to ratify any constitutional amendment passed in a convention of the states. A high bar, indeed. Brett?
This is one to follow. Doug, thank you. Every few days, we update you, unfortunately, on the almost nightly carnage in Chicago, where more than 1,100 people have been shot so far this year. That city has recorded its 200th homicide of 2017 just last week. Tonight, how outgunned police are trying to even up the odds. Here's correspondent Matt Finn.
Chicago police on edge after shooters used an AR-15 assault rifle to ambush 2 undercover officers in this van. CPD is warning officers that gang members are increasingly using what it calls weapons of war, guns like AR-15s and AK-47s.
This gang is in possession of numerous military-style rifles capable of penetrating officers' body armor.
4 of Chicago's most powerful city council aldermen are firing back, proposing the city immediately expedite the certification process that allows officers to carry the same high-powered weapons they're facing on the streets. In an unofficial experiment, you could see a clear difference in firepower between the 9mm police carry versus an AR-15 and an AK-47. The 9mm makes a dent in a cinder block. The AR-15 bullets pierce the first wall of a cinder block and damage the second wall. The AK-47
full metal jacket bullet makes a clean hole in the first wall and then cracks the second one, so the most powerful.
The ACLU says it's not entirely against more officers with long guns, but it would want to see a practical proposal first.
Our concern now is whether or not police officers are seen as partners in the community or whether they're seen as a militarized presence.
In Chicago in 2015, officers were fired at 18 times. Fortunately, none hit. Last year in 2016, officers fired at 31 times. 9 officers hit and wounded. So far in 2017, officers were fired at least 9 times. 3 officers hit and wounded. The aldermen are urging City Council and Mayor Rahm Emanuel, whose relationship with the police department can be described as rocky, to put down politics and pass better police policy.
At some points, we're averaging more people shot in Chicago than they are in some civil wars going on in small countries. We have to put parties aside and start all working together.
The aldermen say they are working together with the police superintendent on this proposal, and right now there are hundreds of officers who would like to get certified to use long guns. Mayor Rahm Emanuel's office has not returned our requests for a comment on this matter. Brett?
This won't be the last story, unfortunately, from Chicago. Matt Finn, thank you. On this Mother's Day, there are many moms whose children are not able to celebrate with them. That's because they've died in the growing opioid epidemic sweeping parts of this nation. Tonight, correspondent Brian Yennis on the faces of addiction.
On January 27th, 2017, our beautiful son, Andrew, died from an overdose of heroin. He was 23 years old.
Stephanie Oswald is just one of a growing number of parents publicly sharing their child's battle with addiction in their obituaries.
People have to stop seeing it as a dirty little secret because it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. And so the more people who are honest about what's going on out there, the more attention it can get.
Andrew's addiction began after being prescribed oxycodone following a car accident. He then began using heroin. Despite rehab, Stephanie's only child died alone in his apartment.
No parent should ever have to bury their child.
For Stephanie, sharing her son's addiction was not an easy decision, but important to help parents suffering in silence.
He had kept it such a secret to all of his friends here. I feel like I outed him in a way. It was momentary, but I still thought it.
Brian Hunt's son Adam died of a heroin overdose 3 years ago. It was his 3rd overdose.
You don't want to admit that there's a problem with your child. We didn't.
After his son's death, Brian wrote a newspaper op-ed warning other parents it could happen to them.
That's the message, really. Don't keep it quiet. Let people know, because if you ask, everybody knows somebody now that has an addiction or lost their lives to drugs.
Brian now attends support groups. He says he doesn't want his son's death to be in vain.
You guys are blessed. Even though you have a child with addiction, you know what you guys have that I don't? And forgetting about the child portion, you have hope. You have a whole world of tomorrows. Because tomorrow was the day that he said, I'm done.
Both Brian and Stephanie believe honesty about their anguish has saved lives. Brett?
Brian, thank you. Up next, the president's transportation secretary on rebuilding the roads and bridges that your family travels on every day. It has been an incredibly busy week, the last few weeks, for the airline industry, and not in a good way. Just in the past week, fights have broken out at an airport in Florida and on a plane in Southern California. Many in the industry and out feel customer service may now be at an all-time low. We spoke about all of this and also infrastructure a few days ago with Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao. First, though, I asked her about the firing of her Trump administration colleague, FBI Director James Comey. When you first heard that, what were your thoughts?
Well, that's not really in my lane, to use a highway hyperbole. From what I understand, the president acted upon the advice of the Justice Department. The president thought that it was in the best interest of the country, and so he took decisive and bold action immediately.
Let's talk about your lane. First of all, we've seen so much turmoil in the airline industry and these images of these fights breaking out. Your thoughts assessing all of this from your vantage point?
I'm obviously very concerned about the rights of the passenger. And so to that end, the Department of Transportation has posted a passenger Bill of Rights. And for anyone that's interested, they should go on www.dot.gov. And right on the home page are passengers' Bill of Rights that tells passengers what their rights are, what recourse they have, and where can they go, including the Department of Transportation, if they have problems. But I think the most important thing is that the airlines themselves need to address this problem, and they should.
You've been charged and leading a FAA modernization effort.
We've all, as airline passengers, experienced delays, congestion in the air, and I think people are really tired of it. So this whole ATO modernization, air traffic control modernization, air traffic operations modernization, is part of this new infrastructure initiative that the president is talking about. And so he has said that we need to invest about $1 trillion over the next 10 years to address our infrastructure needs, to build it up, to repair, rebuild, and to make our country competitive again.
The stats are pretty staggering. 56,000 plus structurally deficient bridges, a little bit more than 9% of all the nation's bridges, crossings. Talking about infrastructure and then having a plan that actually is getting it across the finish line in that building behind me are two different things. Is there a timeline for this?
We've been hard at work at this, and so we'll be releasing principles in about 2 to 3 weeks, and then the legislative proposal will probably be tackled by the Congress in the third quarter. I've been there since February 1st, and in that time, we have released about 3 years worth of backlog of emergency repair funds, totaling about $760 million. And we're looking at ways in which new projects can be made to come on stream faster so that they can be funded faster and so they can be financed faster as well.
There's been talk on the financing side about a public-private partnership. Those companies or individuals who invest in that expect some return, so there has to be a tax side to it. And